Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about the Ogres and their legendary lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. At number 3, it would be Greece's Goldtooth. To be certain, all the Ogre legendary lords are very strong at the moment given the Ogre rework, but I think Greece's just kinda isn't as good as either Scrag or Golgfag. The reason behind that is he doesn't start with a camp. He doesn't start with a tier 2 camp, and he also doesn't start with a tier 2 barracks in the same way Scrag does. So in that way, he is in the worst starting position. Yes, you can get the Maw Gate camp through an early confederation, in particular if you use the ability to replenish all your movement range. But do consider that you're going to be spending 5,000 of your own cash in order to be able to do this on turn 1. Or you could decide not to do it on turn 1, but that does come with some of its drawbacks as well. You have, however, a much bigger problem. In terms of like starting position dynamics, dealing with Gorst may seem like a nightmare, but it's actually quite fairly simple. You do want to deal with Gorst because he does give you, there's usually some Skaven contract that will give you a decent amount of rewards if you do manage it. So that is absolutely worth doing. But there are, however, certain drawbacks to talk about with regards to Greece's. He does get the most camps out of all of the ogres, and he does unlock hero recruitment of all heroes in a local province, and increases capacity for all those heroes. That sounds great until you realize the real issue that Greece's does have. Out of all the Ogre legendary lords, he is the one with the least meat, by far and away. Compared to Scrag and compared to Golgfag, the amount of meat that Greece's is going to get is not going to be anywhere near as significant. To be certain, fighting Kugaf, fighting Skaven, fighting others will generate a good amount of meat eventually in your campaign, but as I've said in many videos, the early game of a campaign is what determines your campaign, and Greece's just has the slowest start out of all of them, even if in the long term he can achieve a great deal of power. But on top of that, he doesn't even necessarily have the same level of power that either Scrag or Golgfag can actually achieve, because those two in particular can be quite damn ridiculous. And also, yeah, his mobility scooter bullshit has really gotten tiring at this point in the game. I gotta say, like, it's just so silly. I mean, I understand that it makes sense, quote-unquote, for his character, but yeah, it's just a really silly damn thing at this stage. At number 2, it would be Scrag the Slaughterer. Scrag starts with Gorgers, which is already a fairly significant benefit on its own right, because Gorgers are really powerful early game when they can do a significant amount of damage. Then on top of that, he can get more offers to the Great Maw than anyone else in a campaign, because of all the benefits he does have with respect to it. So he has them much cheaper, and his skill line also reduces it for other lords in his faction. Scrag's power really does come, a lot of it comes down actually to his lord effects, but there is plenty of faction effect benefits as well that do come when you're playing this specific faction. If we look at the faction effects for Scrag, he doesn't have the same amount of money as Greece's, so money may be a bit of an issue early on, but you have a lot of freaking meat. You also gain 10% campaign movement range, which is actually one of the more powerful faction effect bonuses you can get in the game. But 10% meat gained from battle by default is already very strong, but this goes further, because you can increase it up to 50% with the Prophet of the Grey Maw. You do need to maintain 10 plus of these offers to the Grey Maw if you're going to do so, but that just means you need to maintain 2.5 armies essentially, or two armies that have all 4, and then a third that only has 2. Given the ludicrous amount of meat that you can gain in battles, that is not really going to be a problem in any way, shape, or form. But this goes further. Your starting province has 2 mountain ranches, and each of these mountain ranches can give you unit mass and meat generated for armies in the local province. It also gives you capacity for butchers. So while you may not have the same kind of hero capacity for all heroes that Greases may get early on, in the long term you will be able to get far more heroes than he will. Because ultimately, with regards to all that meat means you can focus on other structures, you can actually get more camps. It might take you longer to reach the number of camps that Greases has, but from a practical standpoint, you'll be able to level up 2 camps faster, much faster in point of fact, than you would be able to level up 1. And that is actually a fairly significant advantage. Beyond the fact that Scrag himself is absolutely bananas in battle, even if you don't play as him, even if you were to get the Confederation going as him. But the advantage with regards to Confederation is not really in the hands of Greases, it's actually in the hands of Scrag in some ways compared to that. Because you can reach Greases, you do have a lot of flexibility in this campaign. Furthermore, I do wish to point out that you do have access to a bunch of resources, including Salt, which removes the meat upkeep from armies in local and adjacent provinces. You do have access to Furs for missile resistance over here, and more meat generation, and you have access to iron in this province, close enough to you as well. So there's a bunch of really good resources that you can make use of over here in this campaign. Also, one shouldn't ignore the exotic animal bazaar, because you can get stone horns and thunder tusks from that at tier 3. So there's a really good amount of power from this. Depends on where you want to go for. Personally, I would ignore getting the Western Border Princes for a while and instead focus on getting the Blood River Valley, but that is your personal decision. Regardless, Scrag is really strong in battle himself. He himself, with his magical capability and the 4 Gorgers he can summon in battle, might be able to solo a lot of the armies you deal with in a campaign. He has a lot of healing, he has a lot of magical capability. In fact, he can get more or less infinite winds of magic, especially if you get a lot of butchers in his campaign. And keep in mind something about butchers. It's not just the ones that you're getting from the mountain ranch that matter here. It's also the fact that stacks with the ones you get from the meat store, if you want to go down that path. You also start with the tier 2 barracks in a region and a tier 2 camp. So what you can do very early on in a Scrag campaign is recruit a bunch of Ogre Bulls with dual weapons, both locally and on a camp level. That is a pretty substantial advantage to consider. Another advantage that you may want to consider with Scrag is that there is a possibility, not a certainty, but there is a possibility that when you start this campaign, you may want to start this campaign multiple times to get it, but there's a possibility of getting treasure in the water right here, which might result in you fighting a battle and getting even more money. Like, Greases might be the god of gold, but that's because he's spending it. You may actually have more gold in the first place than he does. Don't get me wrong, Greases does get to a ludicrous level slower, but it takes some time. Scrag just gets there quickly, potentially, depending on how it's going to go down with respect to that. His contracts, the one advantage Greases does have is with regards to the bounties he has. The bounties in Scrag's campaign do leave something to be desired. Or at least the ones that I typically get. And finally, at number 1, it would be Golgfag Maneater, the new kid on the block. And the new kid on the block has teleportation, so he has the ability of confederating the other 2 much easier than either Scrag or Greases can. To be certain, Scrag can engineer a situation where he declares war on Golgfag and then marches his army towards Greases while Golgfag is coming for his capital. You can take advantage of that. But with Golgfag, with his teleportation, you can guarantee confederation more or less with the other ogres. You just need to get the contract to Cathay, get over there, and then maybe a contract for Elspeth or something along those lines in order to teleport down south and find your way to Scrag. But it is something you can more or less guarantee in this campaign, which is a fairly substantial advantage, and one that shouldn't be dismissed. Now, in other respects, Goldfag, he does not have the same kind of level of power that the others have, because he can't form alliances. His faction effects aren't necessarily the best in the world, except for the contracts. And the contracts are, well, let's just put it as simply as we can. The contracts are absolutely ridiculous sometimes. Like, consider this one. Always on the move, 15% campaign movement range for 7 turns for all armies, speed for all units. It is randomized, and I would almost always recommend going for the Aslan contract, but it depends on what you're getting here, doesn't it? But yeah, I would generally go for Aslan. That's because there's furs and timber over here in Nordland, so I would just take that contract, conquer Nordland for myself, and get access to those furs in particular. Just consider that more worth it than conquering the gold mine from Aslan. You have a huge amount of meat and a huge amount of gold from the contracts. But also, because you're constantly fighting factions and you're teleporting from faction to faction as opposed to having to expand your territory naturally, while you may not get the same amount of meat from battles as Crag can get, and in a practical sense, you will be able to actually even surpass him. Pick a contract, go teleport, beat up some powerful enemy, and get so much meat you have no idea what to actually do with it. And that is not a joke. Like, Scrag may get more meat, again, through the battles he's fighting, but the ability of teleporting and picking fights and choosing to go for the biggest threats means that in this campaign, the amount of resources you have are damn near infinite. Literally, CA could remove all the meat and gold you get as contract rewards, and you probably still would be able to surpass Greece's by quite a substantial amount. It would be a bit of a coin flip with regards to Scrag, but it's still something available. Don't even get me started on the fact that you double dip because you have both bounties and mercenary contracts. Maybe Goldfag should not have bounties, I'm just putting it out there. But all the same, the capability in this campaign to be completely over the top, completely ridiculous, is just insane. Yes, you may not start with a settlement, you only start with tier 2 camp, so in some ways Scrag has a better start in that respect. But let's just say you will be able to level this camp faster to max level, much faster to max level than Scrag will, and certainly much faster than Greece's will, and you'll be able to get that second camp up and running as quickly as possible. And sure, getting a third camp may take a while because of research, unless you go and confederate Greece's and get access to a special skill line, which would give you that third camp. So, ludicrous level of power that you have in this campaign. And unlike other ogres where, you know, if you're playing a Scrag campaign, you have factions declaring war on you. If you're playing a Greece's campaign, why I find playing a Goldfag campaign is that rarely do many factions declare war on me. Usually I'm the one deciding that and then just getting temporary peace agreements. It does pay off to be a mercenary because you might piss off a lot of people, but because you beat everyone up and then get peace agreements with them, no one's gonna want to screw around with you too much. You will have some declarations of war, just be careful around that aspect, and be careful about the middling contract because Kazarek can ruin your settlements. But outside of like some specific issues, this is an incredibly powerful campaign. Costin signing out, and stay tuned for more.